The worst first name to have if you go to prison is Chester. Former inmates of Reddit: how are rapists, pedophiles really treated once in prison? About 15 years ago I was locked up for pulling a gun on someone in a drug deal gone wrong. Since it was my first offense, I was young, and wasn't a problem prisoner. I got a job inside on the cleaning crew. My job at the time was to go into the showers with this high-pressure spray bottle and spray down everything with cleaning chemicals. I did this on every block in the prison, including the secure housing units. There were 2 of those, one for people in the hole, and the other for new inmates on quarantine and protective custody inmates. There was an inmate who came in who was caught in the act by the girl's mother molesting her daughter. It was all over the newspapers, so everyone knew his name and what he looked like. 2 days after he arrived, I went in to clean the shoe blocks. I recognized him as I walked past his cell towards the shower. On the way back out of the cell block, I shuffled through the cell block looking towards the pod where the COs were in. Upon seeing that they weren't looking, stopped in front of his cell and sprayed chemicals all over him and his bed through the bars. When I finished, I turned around to start walking out and both of the COs were looking directly at me. I froze like a deer in the headlights, because I figured I had just lost all my privileges and would probably get another 3 to 6 months to serve. One of them just gave me an approving nod and went back to reading his paper. There is no such thing as protection for baby rapists. I did several years in several different security level prisons, but only a small amount of time in high security facilities. The violent criminals are normally kept separate from the drug etc. Criminals and anyone can tell you any kind of lie they want about what they are in for. In my experience, prison is quite unlike what people on the outside think it is. People clique up and pretty much keep to themselves. The pedos and rapists can also normally find some group to be in. People seem to think that there is rampant rape in prison, but believe me, there are enough people in there who want to have sex that rape is not really necessary. Just slip off to the showers when the lights go out. Honestly, as far as the media's depiction of prison life, Orange is the New Black is the closest thing I've seen to my experience. These are excerpts from the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot. A group of prisoners broke into the PC unit where they held snitches and rapist pedos. Unfortunately for the prisoners in protective custody, the rioters found blowtorches that had been brought into the prison as part of an ongoing construction project. They used these to cut through the bars over the next 5 hours. Locked in their cells, the segregated prisoners called to the state police pleading for them to save them, but to no avail. Waiting officers could do nothing despite there being a back door to cell block 4, which would have offered a way to free them. The inmates were not freed because state police agreed to not enter the prison as long as officers held hostage were kept alive. Meanwhile, the rioters began taunting prison officials over the radio about what they were going to do to the men in cell block 4. But no action was taken. The security panel controlling the cell doors was burned off. Victims were pulled from their cells to be tortured, dismembered, decapitated, or burned alive. An eyewitness described the carnage in cell block 4. They saw an inmate held up in front of a window. He was being tortured by using a blow torch on his face. They then started using the torch on his eyes, and then the inmate's head exploded. Men were killed with piping, work tools and knives. One man was partially decapitated after being thrown over the second-tier balcony with a noose around his neck. The corpse was then dragged down and hacked up. Not an inmate myself, but I just asked a friend who did 4-5 years. This was his answer. Usually nobody beside you in the administration knows why you are in. And if your case didn't hit the media, you can make up whatever reason you want when asked. The guards will only know when you are a threat to safety or endangered yourself. Normal rapists usually don't have to deal with much trouble unless they seem to be an easy victim for sexual assault, so the "you are scum and we'll give you a swig of your own medicine" is basically just the jail version of no homo. A pedo will get real trouble if anyone finds out. This can be everything between being excluded from social interaction to being beaten up or raped or even killed. It still depends on his ability to protect himself against physical violence, but let's face it, most people can't do shit against a group who wants to fuck them up. Here it is the same. The bringing justice by doing the same to him is mostly an excuse for sexually frustrated inmates to have sex with another man without being gay. At least that is how it is in German jails. They put them in their own special block, C block where I was. They called it the Chester cell. We used to yell across the yard or dorm that, "I ain't no goddamn Chester." Corrections officer here. We put all sexual criminals in their own cell block, they have zero contact with the other inmates, they aren't even on the same floor as them. Interestingly, we've found it works best to have them on one half of the floor and the women on the other half. This is largely due to what I've often observed as the far less alpha male mentality of a lot of the people accused of sexual crimes as opposed to murderers, professional thieves, drug dealers, etc. I honestly don't think that a lot of the other inmates have this higher moral sense about the rapists, though some very much do, some so strongly that they will attack on sight. A lot of people in jail prison are quite convinced that they did nothing wrong. It helps them to see someone who is really bad, in their minds unlike themselves who, well, I didn't have a choice, or, I'm just trying to get by. You can't rationalize child rape the way you can robbing a bank. There is, of course, a streak of inmates who hate their guts because inmates are people too. They have families. Daughters, mothers, wives, sisters, etc. The very idea of someone hurting their families the way the sexual predators have hurt others sickens and infuriates them as it does most people. That's completely understandable. Shit, we have one guy who is in our dorms for various petty thefts. Upstairs, however, is a guy who is charged with raping the accused thief's girlfriend. The inmates can be just as personally affected by the sexual predators as anyone. All told, honestly, if we didn't segregate the groups, the chomos, as they are often called by the inmates, a portmanteau of child molester and homosexual, which is a serious slur that carries the connotation of one being a rapist of little boys, would likely be repeatedly assaulted and probably killed now and then. The reason that facilities operate like mine, and you have heard all these rumors, is because it's simply true, sexual predators are the prey of the rest of the inmates. I am from California and just turned 30 few weeks ago. I was incarcerated for 9 years, 1 month and 4 days at a level 3 maximum security facility. Most rapists, pedophiles known as PC for protective custody are kept away from GP for general population. PCs are despised in prisons and looked down upon. Years ago GP were mainline, meaning they have special privileges like schooling, visits, sales, special programs. Times have changed. Many inmates that are charged turn and snitch on others as a means to lower their sentencing, leading them to do time in PC. Many prisons are converting to PCs now and GP is running low. PCs have more privileges now. Also, violent crimes must serve around 85% of their sentencing. Rape and nonviolent crimes serve 50% if they're sentencing. A new law will make sex crimes serve a much harsher sentencing, but I have no updates about that matter. Prisons are overpopulated, but many offenders are sentenced too severely for minor offenses. Prisons are like a revolving door for inmates. There is no solutions offered in the prison systems. Many offenders reoffend, contributing to the recidivism ratio. I'm lucky I still have family, barely any friends, and determination to stay out of trouble because I have inflicted too much pain around my loved ones. I was young and should have known better, but drugs money lost track of my life and influenced by the wrong people led me to FBI taking down the entire gang. I am happy now with whatever I have. More is always better, but now I'm fine working my way towards a better life the right way. Corrections officer here. The pedo is the absolute bottom on the jail-prison scale. If someone was charged with lewd acts on a child, they sign themselves up for protective custody. Meaning they are kept away from general population. If someone in GP is found to be a child molester, the inmates call them Chesters. Chester the molester, they will be beaten severely. The rapists, it depends on individual inmates' stance. Some may think crimes against women are heinous, some may not. But no one except the pedos accepts lewd, lascivious acts on children, and they will be hurt. Never done any time, but I used to work in the medical department of a jail, got to know the ins and outs of the system pretty well. As many others here are saying, they're generally segregated. I will say that there are a few sexual offenders in jail that end up with roommates, and they always lie about what they're in for. While I worked there, we had one guy in general pop who was a child rapist in on several counts of it, and a nurse who lost her job and nursing license for this got mad at him and yelled something about, "You child rapist," in front of a bunch of other inmates. You couldn't blink before the jailers were grabbing him up and getting him out of there. He was immediately transported to a solo cell, and had it put in his file that he could never go into general population, even on future bookings or while back for court later on. The system is very cautious with sexual offenders, which I'm morally conflicted on. On one hand, it certainly isn't great for you to get the shit beaten out of you or get raped while in jail, but on the other hand, fuck you for fucking kids. The thing that upsets me the most, honestly, is that, in the jail I worked in, and its prison counterparts, so much manpower goes into protecting these types of inmates, that the nice inmates who are there for practically nothing totally slip through the cracks. We had one guy who suffered severe PTSD due to being raped almost daily in prison. I think he served a year for selling meth. He was a really attractive, itty-bitty scrawny white kid who was too afraid of everyone to stand up for himself, and it was just upsetting because he was really nice to his cellmates and the jailers and nurses, just a guy who'd been in the system since he was 7 or 8 years old, orphaned as a toddler, that whole sad story, just turning dope to keep from living on the streets. I know I went off on a tangent there, but I guess my point is that I wish more time was spent on rehabilitating and helping people like him, rather than protecting the assholes who are in for real crimes. There are a lot of posts here saying that most people don't know or that only the convict and administration know. I have 2 uncles that have both spent time in prison. They both have pretty much the same story on how this goes down. How the raper is handled varies on the prison though. This is how they told me it goes. When you get a new cellie, you put your paperwork on your bunk and leave. Then vice versa. This gives you a chance to go over the person's shit while you aren't stuck in the room with them. One of my uncles said that there were a few times that they would try to put one in there with him and he said that shit didn't fly. After he would see their paperwork he would tell them that they need to get a new cell. Like others here have said, they do for the most part try to give those people a different area, but every once in a while they slip through the cracks. And then in turn, something slips in their crack. They both told me that they will usually get that same shit put back on them at some time or another, and it was mostly because they didn't keep to themselves. They are like the low of the low in there though. Was gonna make a throwaway. But ain't nobody got time for that. So here goes. I went to jail once for some BS, and while I was in line to get pictured and fingerprinted, the one CO taking the picture was also writing down info from another CO doing the fingerprinting. So as one would take your fingerprints, he would control the line and yell out the information down about 15 to 20 feet to the other, info like age, race, prisoner ID number, alleged crime. Now, they are not really supposed to do this, but it was a Friday and IDK they just did. So everyone online got to hear what everyone else was being charged with. A guy about 4 to 5 people in front of me was brought in for raping a minor. Whether she 14/7 we weren't sure. But what we were sure of was the alleged charge, sexual assault and sodomy on minor. That being my first night in jail, I was unsure what to expect. As I was brought into Gen Pop, it was almost light out, so the shot caller, older inmate in charge of my section, let me know that I could bunk with him so I would feel safe and have an easy first night of sleep. I was in the Hispanic but not Mexican section. As I get ready for sleep and try to adjust to my new surroundings, the shot caller from another part of the jail, white section, comes up to the guy in the bottom bunk and says, "Hey, so-and-so is here for child molestation." The shot caller of the Mexican side said they don't want that type here, and neither do I, so I'm going to look the other way when they pay a visit tonight. Just thought you should know, and walks away. After an hour or so I fell asleep and remember being woken up at 4:30 by the guy the first was bunking with because it was breakfast time. I was like, WTF, breakfast now? So as I sit there trying to wake up and realize that I'm not in some dream, said white shot caller comes over and says, "Okay, it's cool, he's not in my section anymore." The Hispanic shot caller asked what happened, and apparently about 10 to 15 guys came over to him while he was sleeping, grabbed each limb and stabbed him over 40 times, rolled him up in his bed mat thing and threw him by the door. Then ran back to their beds. As the COs came running in, everyone was back in bed sleeping and a guy laying right by the door bleeding wrapped up in his bed mat. Pedo was taken to infirmary, and whether he survived or not I will never know. But what I learned that first night was that anything can happen and the response time is too long, plus COs do things they aren't supposed to. Pedo got stabbed 40 times first night in jail while other inmates pretended they knew nothing. Correction officer here, just to set a few things straight based on some of the comments I read. Rape is real in prison. Someone already hit the nail on the head when they commented that guys who have been raped probably won't admit to it. I don't work in a maximum security facility, but I've heard from guys who do that the rape problem is very real. I've even been given training regarding rape despite having almost no rapes in my jail. Also, the stuff about child molesters getting beat up is completely true. They are housed separately because of their crimes and would most likely be beaten, slashed if sent to GP, general population. If you don't think there is a code among inmates, you're sadly mistaken. Not to say they're good people, but I've seen inmates save female officers from getting stabbed because the inmate code dictates that you don't hit women or children. I've even seen an inmate get beat half to death by other inmates because he punched a female correction officer. While waiting in a holding cell with about 20 inmates for hearings to finish, my offense was non-violent, victimless, a few of them are chatting. There are media cameras set up in the courtroom and many of us groaned at the thought of popping up on TV. All summer long a rapist had been terrorizing one of the most popular parks in my city. He had many victims, some that had been killed. All the victims were young women. Even inside, it was quite infamous. As the inmates were chatting, one of the older guys' heads perks up. "Hey you." He points to a quiet guy in the corner. "I recognize you from the paper. This is the rapist from the park." Everyone stops and turns. Keep in mind this holding cell is about 8x15 and there are 20 plus full-grown men crammed inside. The accused denies it and after being pressed by everyone, admits that he is in fact this serial rapist murderer. One of the older convicts tenses up and explains that his daughter's best friend was one of his victims and that she was 15 at the time. Fury ensues. Two tall guys stand in front of the windows at the front of the cell to block the camera. Two guys grab the rapist and shove to the center of the small cell. It's all seemed like everyone had done this before. I back up into the toilet nook. I am no criminal looking to do more time, nor am I violent in any fashion. The guy who was talking about knowing a victim pulls him close by the neck and starts spewing about what scum he is and how he has no problem doing more time to end the rapist's life. The rapist, who may or may not have been mentally handicapped, was terrified, shaking. The guy started to choke him while others were kicking him. It only lasted half a minute before guards came to the windows and started screaming that everyone inside would be charged with additional felonies if it didn't stop. Luckily, for my sake, they did. And the guards yanked the rapist out to put him in his own cell. Hours later, we get back to the jail. During dinner, the rapist gets destroyed in the gym, just a big room, while everyone else goes on lockdown. The guards just watched as two Samoan brothers fucked this rapist up. So much blood. The guards came in force once the brothers settled down. They were hauled off along with the totally mangled rapist. A mod worker inmate spent the rest of the evening cleaning the blood out of the gym. The Samoan brothers were cheered as they were escorted out of the mod. I was informed that when they return to Gen Pop mods, they will be rewarded by other inmates for their deeds. I worked at a prison. We had this guy who said he was in for murder. One day the inmates find out he was really in for raping to death his week-old daughter. Not sure how they did it, but they literally broke his dick. It was ruptured. He could not walk without assistance for a few months. Also, it swole up to horrific size. He was not enjoying life. Honestly, the only thing that keeps pedophiles alive in prison is no one is willing to trade 20 years or so of their time for the pleasure of ending the pedophiles. Not an ex-prisoner, but have a relevant story. A prison in my town had a riot, and it is known that all sorts of shit goes on in a riot. People killing each other, smashing everything that can be smashed. They even found a couple of high-security doors inches thick of solid steel torn off and thrown. In one particular riot, the prisoners managed to get hold of a set of keys, and their first instinct was to try and break into the unit where all the vulnerable people are kept, that is, pedophiles, rapists, those who are at risk from the other prisoners. Many of the people in those units, once they realized what was going on, were hanging themselves before the other prisoners managed to get to them. I cannot imagine what they would do that would make hanging yourself better. The guy who killed a 7-year-old nearby was eventually killed in prison himself. That guy caused me a lot of grief. I was an EMT on the call to help the kid after the guy beat the shit out of him. I ended up with PTSD after he confessed to me the gory details of how he did it. Girlfriend is a prison nurse. The gangs don't like people convicted of the following crimes: anything involving kids, rape, domestic abuse. When anyone new comes onto the yard, his racist gang boss will come up to him and say, "Give me your papers," meaning, give me the legal stuff that shows what you're sentenced for. If he's been convicted for any of these things, the boss will tell him, "You have 1 day to put yourself into protective custody. After that, you're fucked." Some listen, some don't. The ones who don't usually end up in the infirmary, severely beaten and with genital and anal trauma. Not pretty. I'm a nursing student. My instructor was a prison nurse before getting his ICU gig. He said he treated a lot of wild shit, but this was the worst. There was a convicted child rapist put in the general population and he kept it secret. One of the guards, on his way into retirement, let the secret slip intentionally. The rapist was raped so bad that they had to perform a descending colonostomy, a lower bowel resection which is capped by an opening from which the feces exits into a bag. A sigmoid colonostomy is usually first, but the damage was so bad they had to go further up the tract. He quite literally got his asshole raped off. Then, after recovery, they let him back into prison and he got raped again. Except there's no real asshole where the asshole was. They ripped the shit bag off his abdomen and fucked the ostomy hole. He then had to get a transverse colonostomy even further up the large intestine. That's persistence. My uncle did approximately 12 years in California and other places. We talked about this recently, as well as some other things. He said that if it ever gets out that you are a rapist, in most cases they will beat the hell out of you or kill you. Sometimes they would just hold it over your head and force you to give them your stuff. For pedos it's just a death sentence. They don't fuck around with that. As soon as it gets out, at the first opportunity you are dead. No talking or beatings or anything, they just kill you. And if you knew someone was a pedo and you didn't kill them when you had the chance, you would get beaten for it. Keep in mind that at the time in Cali the prisons were grossly overpopulated. I don't know how much special treatment the admins could give to segregate them from the general population. He and a lot of other inmates were later forced to move out of state to less crowded prisons. I work in a maximum security prison where we don't segregate them from other offenders. Let's just say the last time an inmate found out his cellie was a child molester ended badly. He ripped his testicles off and beat him with a fan motor. So you know, not well.